Right now, while you sit here, there are people living at the bottom of the sea, not visiting, living. They sleep down there. They eat down there. They have been sealed inside a steel tube the size of a school bus for weeks, breathing a gas that bends their voices into a thin, inhuman squeak. The pressure pressing in on them would empty your lungs in seconds. And there is one rule none of them can break. They cannot come up. Not today, not tomorrow. If one of them collapsed this minute, even the fastest way to get him to the surface alive would take the better part of a week. A steel chamber, a diving bell, a suit flooded with hot water, a welding torch burning in black, freezing water 300 feet down, voices like cartoons, hands building things almost no one will ever see. This is a real job, and it quietly built a hidden world the rest of us depend on. The men who do it call it saturation. And one cold morning in 1983, on a rig in the Norwegian Sea, the exact physics keeping 4 of them alive turned on them and killed them in 1/10 of a second. This is the story of the strangest, deadliest job in the ocean and the day it showed everyone why. To understand what happened, you first have to understand how a person ends up living on the seafloor at all. A saturation diver does not really stay in the water. He lives on a ship inside a cluster of pressurized chambers welded to the deck. The moment he climbs in, the doors seal and the crew begins raising the pressure to match the depth he will be working at. Over the next few hours, his entire world is compressed. His ears, his sinuses, the gas dissolving into his blood. By the time it is finished, simply opening that door would kill him. So the door stays shut, sometimes for as long as 28 days. Inside, life is almost ordinary. There are bunks and a toilet and a shower. Meals arrive through a small airlock, sealed on one side, pressurized, then opened on the other. Hot food, coffee, a paperback or 2. The divers talk, and the helium in the air lifts their voices into a squeak so high that even they cannot understand each other. Every word has to be fed through an electronic unscrambler just to sound like speech again. Their sense of taste flattens. Small cuts are slow to close. On some level, the body always knows it does not belong here. And there is no stepping outside for air, no quick way home if the mind starts to fray. A diver has to make his peace with the pressure long before he ever reaches the seabed. When a shift begins, they climb down into a diving bell, a steel sphere bolted to the bottom of the chamber. The bell is lowered on a cable into water so cold and so dark the lamps barely cut through it. The divers step out, work, and climb back in. Then the bell carries them home to a chamber that is still, in every way that matters, the bottom of the ocean. None of this began with oil. It began with a dream. In the late 1950s, a United States Navy doctor named George Bond became convinced of something that sounded like science fiction. He believed human beings could one day live in the sea the way they lived on land. He started a series of experiments and named them Genesis, after the first book of the Bible. And he set out to prove one strange fact about the human body. Here is that fact. When you breathe gas under pressure, it slowly dissolves into your tissues, the way fizz is forced into a sealed bottle. But your body cannot soak up gas forever. After about a day at a given depth, you hit a ceiling. You are full, saturated. And from that point on, it makes no difference whether you stay 1 more hour or 1 more month. You cannot take in any more gas, so the price of coming back up stops getting worse. Bond saw the opening in that if a diver had to pay the same long, dangerous toll of decompression, no matter what, he might as well stay down for weeks and do real work instead of snatching a few minutes at the bottom and racing back. In 1964, the Navy lowered a habitat called Sea Lab off Bermuda, and men lived inside it on the seafloor. They came back up alive. Bond had been right. In the same years, Jacques Cousteau was sinking his own underwater houses in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, filming aquanauts who stayed below for weeks at a time. For a few short years, the future looked like cities beneath the waves. The future turned out to be oil rigs. Saturation exists because of what the ocean does to a body that breaks the rules. Drop down on a single tank of compressed air and the pressure drives gas into your blood and tissue. Rise back up too quickly and that gas does exactly what the bubbles do when you crack open a shaken can. It comes fizzing out of solution while it is still inside you. In your joints, along your spine, inside your brain. Divers have called it the bends for over 100 years, and at its worst, it cripples or it kills. A second danger waits further down. Past a certain depth, plain nitrogen begins to act like a drug. Divers turn giddy, then muddled, then strangely calm, a kind of drunkenness called narcosis that has coaxed people deeper and deeper until they simply did not return. So the gas in those chambers is not air at all. It is mostly helium, a gas the body absorbs far less hungrily, and one that leaves the mind clear. The helium is why the voices squeak. Saturation is the answer to both. You pressurize a diver once, slowly and carefully. You let his body fill up and settle. You keep him at depth for the entire job. And then, only at the very end, you bring him back in one enormously slow ascent that can stretch across days, bleeding the gas out of him a fraction at a time so it never gets the chance to turn into bubbles. It is an elegant solution. It is also a cage. Because the instant a man is saturated, he belongs to the pressure. He has become, in the most literal sense possible, a prisoner of the deep, and the only road out is slow. But what could possibly be worth it? What is down there that justifies locking a person inside a pressure that could kill him for a month at a stretch? The answer is lying on the seabed, and most of us lean on it every day without a single thought. Pipelines, wellheads. The enormous invisible plumbing that pulls oil and gas out from under the ocean floor and sends it up to the world above. When that machinery cracks or jams or has to be built in the first place, no robot can fully take the place of human hands. So a human goes. The diver leaves the bell into water just above freezing, sometimes only a few degrees off zero, in a darkness so total, his whole world shrinks to the small cone of his lamp. Cold like that would kill a bare body quickly, so he wears a suit fed by a hose of heated water pumped down from the ship, flooding around his skin to keep him alive minute by minute. Everything he needs runs through one thick bundle of hoses and cables they call the umbilical. His breathing gas, his warmth, his voice, his one connection to the surface. Cut it, lose it, or tangle it, and a man is alone in the cold and the black, the surface impossibly far overhead. The bell is his only door back to the chamber. The chamber is his only road back to the world. On an ordinary day, none of that matters. He welds, he cuts, he bolts steel to steel in a place humans were never meant to be. And when his shift ends, he goes back inside. Safe. It ranks among the best paid manual work on Earth, and every penny of it is earned in the dark. The Byford Dolphin was supposed to be one of those ordinary days. It was a drilling rig in the Norwegian waters of the North Sea, working the Frigg gas field, and on the 5th of November 1983, it was carrying out a job it had done hundreds of times. It was just past 4 a.m, the quiet, half-awake hour when nothing is supposed to go wrong. 4 divers were saturated inside the chamber system. Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas, both British, Bjorn Bergersen and Truls Hellevik, both Norwegian. 2 of them had just returned from a shift, and the bell was clamped to the chamber so the divers could transfer across into the living quarters while the others rested. The whole assembly was held at 9 times the pressure of the surface. 2 more men worked the outside, the tenders, whose job was to run the system and move the divers safely between bell and chamber, William Crammond and Martin Saunders. Separating the bell from the chamber was a precise procedure, and it depended entirely on doing the steps in the right order. First, you seal the inner door between the men and the bell. Then, you bleed the short connecting tunnel down to normal pressure. Only then, with the men sealed off and the tunnel emptied, do you release the clamp. That morning, the order came apart. The clamp holding the bell to the chamber was opened while the inner door still stood open and the entire system was still under full pressure. What followed was not gradual. On one side of that gap sat 9 atmospheres, on the other side 1. In roughly a tenth of a second, the deep reached up through the opening and made them equal. What that did is hard to hold in your mind, so hold on to the shaken can one more time. For weeks, those 4 men had been saturated. Their blood, their fat, every tissue in them was packed with dissolved gas, held quietly in place by enormous pressure. That pressure was the only thing keeping it all in solution. And in a fraction of a second, it was gone. The gas came out of them everywhere at once. Not slowly, the careful way decompression is meant to happen, but instantly and violently throughout their entire bodies. Investigators later found that the divers' blood had effectively boiled inside them, and that fat had separated out of the blood itself and pooled around their hearts. One examiner compared what he saw to something fried in a pan. For the 3 men deeper in the chamber, death was instant. They almost certainly never knew it had happened. Truls Hellevik was nearest the open door. He stood directly in the path of all that pressure as it tore toward the gap, and the force drove his body through a crescent-shaped opening barely 60 centimeters across. The result does not need describing. What matters is that it came faster than a human nervous system can register pain. The 2 tenders had no chance either. When the clamp let go, the bell itself was hurled by the escaping pressure and struck both men. William Crammond was killed. Martin Saunders lived, but he was badly hurt. In a single tenth of a second, 5 people were gone. The autopsies that followed became a grim landmark in medicine, one of the clearest accounts ever recorded of what extreme decompression does to the human body. The men's deaths taught the world things it had no other way to learn. When investigators asked how a routine procedure could erase 5 lives in an instant, they did not find a single careless villain. They found a machine that allowed it. The Byford Dolphin's diving system had been built back in 1975, and it carried no defense against this exact mistake. There was no interlock to keep the clamp from opening while the chamber was still pressurized. There was no gauge placed where a tender could double-check the pressure before he moved. The entire wall between routine and catastrophe was a human being, performing the steps flawlessly every single time forever. This is one of the oldest, hardest lessons in safety. When the only thing standing between an ordinary day and a disaster is perfect human attention, the disaster is simply a matter of when. The fixes came fast. Interlocking systems that make this deadly sequence physically impossible became the standard. Justice came far more slowly. It took the families 26 years to win compensation from the Norwegian government, and one diver's son had to wage a 2-year fight of his own. Because his father had been British, and a legal loophole nearly erased him from the claim entirely. These men had died helping build a nation's wealth. Their families spent decades arguing over who owed them anything at all. And this is the part that should stay with you. Saturation diving did not end that morning. It is happening right now. Off the coast of Norway, in the Gulf, in the South China Sea, divers are sealed in steel far below the surface, breathing helium, waiting for a bell. Some have gone even further. In 1992, inside a sealed chamber on land, divers were taken to a simulated depth of more than 700 meters, a crushing pressure no human had ever endured before. We taught ourselves to live in a place that was never built to hold us. Most of the time, it works. The Byford Dolphin is the price of the times it does not. If this pulled you under, know that there is a whole world down here we have barely begun to explore. Subscribe to Blues Below, and we will keep going deeper together. The ocean keeps its secrets. We are only just learning how to ask.